What I'd like to do right now is introduce our moderator, Jason Meese, who will then introduce our other speakers. Jason has deep experience in the area of information technology and IT strategy. He's a partner at IBM's Global Security Services Group, focusing on cyber risk and identity management. Before his time at IBM, he held a similar role at KPMG, and before that at Kubera Solutions, which was bought by KPMG, and Oracle. With 20 years of leadership experience in the field, Jason has seen significant complexity change in this industry and brings a solid foundation of helping clients on this board level topic. Met Jason last night at the speakers gathering and learned that he's born and raised in Chicago. So we share our love for the Cubs. So how many Cub fans do we have in here today? All right. Everyone other than people living in Cleveland, I think this week were Cub fans. So I asked Jason, he obviously does a lot of traveling, working with clients, and so I asked him, so where do you live? And he said, I live in seat 3A, right? Is that right? So with that, Jason, I'm going to ask you and the speakers to come and take your seats, and I'll let you introduce them. Thank you.
So as we get started here, a couple things. When you hear the word cyber, it's one of those things almost like saying cloud these days. It means a whole lot of things to different people. The biggest benefit I've derived from it, besides a good income and a whole lot more income to come, is that my mother now knows what I do for a living because she keeps reading the papers. But she is convinced I wear a hoodie, so if someone could forward me the picture, I'd like to send it to her again and again to remind her that I have matured just a little bit. So with that, generally speaking, when we look at this topic, and we'll do a quick introductions here for the panel to help get a perspective on where we come from. Because that's one of the big baselines I think that boards need to start to get their head around is there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the market. We all see the newspaper headlines. We're almost in this point of breach fatigue, where it's become so commonplace to hear about all the bad things that are happening, it almost becomes difficult to figure out how do we action it, what do we do with it. And effectively, when we really start to think about it from a board level perspective, risk and opportunity are two sides to the same coin. So how do we start to operationalize cyber risk? How do we start to treat it in an ERM model so that we can quantify it, measure it, and start to make capital expenditure decisions against it and determine if we're making the right progress? Again, easier said than done. And so, from thinking about how do we do this and who are the folks kind of talking about it, we definitely want to make this a very interactive session. All three of us could probably talk your ear off and may have at some point in time on this topic. So, we want to make sure that we extract out most of the questions you guys are looking for. So we'll quickly get to that. But by way of background, I've been in industry consuming technology, on the vendor side building technology, as a consultant selling technology, and now back at IBM, most recently here in the last month, taking over as a general manager running the business unit, trying to make sure that we can extend to the customers the appropriate level of cloud security, which is, two cool terms now all munged into one. It's cloud and security. Wow, so it's super good. But joking aside, we want to make sure that we flesh this out for you and give you something actionable and meaningful after this session. So with that, I will hand it over to Gary, then Casey for a quick introduction. So with that, Gary.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Gary McCallum. I am the Chief Security Officer and Senior Vice President at USAA. And if there's any USAA members out there, thank you for your membership. Just as way of background, USAA is an integrated financial services company, banking, property casualty insurance, and wealth management. And it's focused predominantly on the military community and their families. Been at USAA for about 7 years. And prior to that, I served in the Air Force for 25 years. I've been doing this cybersecurity stuff a long time, and so I think the perspective that I bring here, talking to my board every quarter for the last 7 years, and also working with NACD and working with many other directors, I bring the perspective of somebody who's actually doing this job every day, fighting the cyber fight every day, and really living a lot of the things that you read about in the paper. So I think I bring that type of perspective, and I look forward to your questions this morning.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Casey Fleming. I'm Chairman and CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation. My background was IBM's where I started. I also founded the IBM Cyber Division back in the day, which was on a clean sheet of paper in 1993. I've been in cyber ever since, technology and management consulting for over 30 years and so on. Our firm focuses on intelligence, strategy, and cyber, and we advise the world's largest organizations on those subjects. So it's an exciting time. I will tell you that it's bad. It's going to get worse, and we want to make today an absolutely beneficial time to you guys to give you action items, make it valuable, and so on, and make it a good day for you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So with that, right, we've heard the moniker that as bad as you think it is in cyber, it's actually worse. So Casey, what helps you sleep at night?
Well, I sleep like a baby. There you go. I wake up every 2 hours crying for mommy.
Good. So, yeah, from the board's perspective, what would you say is the single biggest risk currently that a corporation could face?
There's actually two risks. One is to the actual board member themselves, and then secondly to the corporation. The corporation is really brand risk or reputational risk to the company if you're publicly traded. But really, boards of directors are mostly at risk because, number one, they didn't come up through cyber. They aren't cyber trained. And then secondly, they're at a point in their career where they've managed to accumulate some type of personal wealth, and now you're being held accountable and so on. And we've seen the headlines, Target, Anthem, Sony, and we see what happens and so on. So it's really two things. Protect yourself as board members, and we'll give you some ideas on how to do that. And then secondly, how to go back to the organization and act as change agents, because this is a cultural change, a policy change, and a funding allocation change. Not to take anything away from IT. Keep the pedal down on IT, but there are things that we need to be doing inside of corporations and the rest of the organization, meaning private sector corporations, government, military, and academia as well.
If you could, for the group, maybe compartmentalize where have we been and where are we going as it relates to the risk threshold that boards face and corporations at this point in time.
Great question. I would say that we continue as a country and in the corporate governance world, I think the level of awareness has evolved. It continues to evolve, but I think we're past the stage of convincing you all that this is a strategic issue for companies, right? At my company, it was a strategic issue from the day that I was hired for all the reasons that Casey just talked about, right? You could quantify what a data breach means if they X million records are exfiltrated, what did it take to recover. That's easy. The damage to reputation, brand, and then all the corresponding issues that come, regulatory and others, are really, really painful. So I think where we're at in this journey is, now what do we do about it, right? And I think the challenge for boards is not to be an expert in cybersecurity and not to come up with a binomial risk acceptance model where we want to eliminate all risk and what does it take, how much money does it take to do that, but to be able to ask really good questions of the folks that are accountable for this every day in the companies that you serve, and make sure that they have the right mindset and they have the resources necessary to mitigate risk to an acceptable level. And I think that's the hardest part of all of this is when you're talking to CIOs, CSOs, CISOs, a lot of time this whole conversation around risk, it's really bad, it's terrible, we need more money. But that's not really a very productive conversation, right? I mean, what does it take for us as our company to get to an acceptable level and then a recognition that, it's not going to be a guarantee that there's not going to be an issue that has to be dealt with. So I think the mindset where we're at is we're right at the point where we think we can prevent something by spending money on it to it's more of a holistic model. We may have a bad day. How are we going to be able to respond to it? And are we prepared to be able to respond to it? So a holistic response and having boards feel comfortable with the answers to those type of questions, I think is where we're at right now.
Great point. So to unpack that a little further, growing up, I could usually solve for one unknown in pre-calculus. Got to calc, there were two unknowns. You become a physics major, you start to get to 3 and 4 unknowns, and then there's wormholes and continuums, and my math isn't that good. So when we look across the paradigm and kind of the different pillars that cyber is right now, so one aspect of it is definitely technology. I think a lot of time has been spent on that. But equally important is governance, trust but verify, process, metrics, and people. If you look across those 5 different kind of dynamics, Gary, what would you say is the one that we spent the most time on, and what's the one we need to spend the most time on?
Well, I can tell you the people that are doing the business every day are focused on the tactical level, right? They're trying to manage the network, they're trying to configure it, they're rolling out patches, they're making sure the antivirus is updated, they're responding to issues that pop up. That's at the tactical level. At the strategic level, I think the people, process, technology, strategy piece of that, We have not spent enough holistically on the strategy part of it in my mind, right? I think where boards need to focus on initially, and this is, again, opinion, maybe we may not agree on this. If you've looked at the NACD Cyber Risk Handbook, I helped contribute to that through the Internet Security Alliance. We talk about some of the first questions that boards need to understand is, do we have the right people that are worried about this on a day-to-day basis? What is the roles and responsibilities, and is there clear lines of accountability for this problem, right? It's everybody's problem, but somebody has to worry about it on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it's the CIO, maybe it's the CISO, maybe it's the CAO or the COO, but who is worried about this every day? Do we have the right people that are focused on this? So I think that's the first step. Do you have the right people? Because the technology process piece, none of that's going to work unless you have leadership and accountability, right, that's focused on this problem.
Excellent, excellent. So I lived in Dallas for a while, so don't hold that against me in this room. And so I've got a couple of analogies I like to use, but in most audiences it's kind of lost. But Casey, there's this concept of don't put a $100 fence around a $20 horse. So when you consult with an organization, how do you help them figure out, how bad is bad, and what does it mean to them, and what should they do about it?
Well, every company and every organization is different on their readiness level, where they are on protecting their company, and so on. I liken it back to this is a cultural change, a policy change, and a funding allocation change. That happens at the board level and the CEO level. That's where change has to be driven through the organization. If you guys remember back in the 80s, remember we had to do sexual harassment training, and then in the 90s we did diversity training. Well, we're at the point right now where we have to do digital training. And that also includes personal hygiene, cyber hygiene, meaning personal cyber hygiene, not just for personal cyber hygiene, which is how you handle information, how your family handles information. That's where it starts, and then it goes into the company piece of it as well. That's where we have to make these changes happen. So that's really the key focus. The most important thing is that change has to happen in the organization, and it's a cultural change on how we handle data. All of us, our laptops, our phones, our emails, Wi-Fi, so on and so forth. There's no such thing as free Wi-Fi, I'll tell you that. Okay, we call it Wi-Spy. So those are the things that, off the top of the head, that really need to be focused on. And as boards of directors, I would say you guys need to be change agents. Because a lot of you didn't come up through cyber. Cyber is not this ghost. It's not as complex as you may think it is. There are several questions you can be asking. There are several viewpoints that you need to take as boards of directors and to go through the organization. Number one, don't feel that your organization don't be complacent. Don't allow your staff, your CEO, CIO, the rest of them to be complacent. Never, always be the change agent, okay? Because it's going to come back on you. When there's a breach, and there will be, and there'll be another one after that and another one after that. Because if you understand what our adversaries are doing, you'll understand why all these breaches are happening. And let me say one thing about the breaches. When you see a breach in the newspapers or in the news or on CNN and that kind of stuff, most of us say, wow, that's unfortunate. You need to understand something was lost, okay? And our adversaries basically say it's death by 1,000 cuts. So that was another cut. So when somebody says Anthem Blue Cross was breached and 80 million records were lost, or the OPM breach and so on and so forth, just realize that every time that happens, that's one of the cuts. And that's what we need to understand, because the problem with cyber is it's very difficult, as Jason was saying, to quantify what the risk is and what the losses are and so on. But if we can start putting some more numbers around it, or some fences around that $20 horse, we'll understand exactly what we need to do to help protect it.
Excellent. Well, I know we've got a brief time here, and we definitely could keep going, right? Pull our strings. Are there some burning questions from the audience? We definitely want to make sure that we cover that off here as aptly as possible. All right, well, while we're waiting for that to queue up, when you think about the different threat actors out there, generally they start to get bucketed into either like nation states, be they hacktivists who maybe have a cause, sometimes a misguided one, or criminals looking for some type of monetary gain. Gary, from a corporate standpoint, which one do you see as the biggest threat? And then Casey, I'll hand it to you for the same question.
Well, my team that I am responsible for, we deal with that every single day. In fact, I was on the phone last night dealing with an issue. And so, for me, it's a very real world every single day, and we deal with all of those threats. I think where we were to where we are today, I think being able to classify something as this is a cyber criminal organization, this is a nation state, this is an hacktivist group, this is an agenda group, and all the offshoots of all of that, or even as one presidential candidate said, the 400-pound hacker in their bedroom, being able to differentiate between those different threat actors, it's very blurry, right? Because the skill level and the tools that are out there and available, right, make it a low bar for market entry, right? The tools and the sharing of information, the vast amount of intelligence that's just available to people that want to do an organization harm is readily available in the underground economy. So we deal with stuff every day, and it's not always clear exactly what we're dealing with. A great example, the thing that we dealt with this week was our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, got a bunch of emails that supposedly came from the CEO. Well, our team picked up that that wasn't from the CEO because the way we bring in external email, and it was all about trying to generate a wire transaction. It's a pretty low sophisticated type of threat. But as we did some additional work and analysis on that, we found out it's coming from Nigeria, right? It's a traditional scam coming from Nigeria, trying to wire money out of an organization. Very low bar, very unsophisticated. But on the far end of that are the very advanced threats, right, that are going to do a lot more intelligence analysis, preparation, right, understanding what their target is, understanding the technologies that you have, understanding the people in the positions that they're in, and really thinking about it for a long period of time, and that's a very hard problem. But in our world, we deal with all of those.
Excellent. Casey, perspective?
All the above. It depends on who's after you that hour, and how you respond to it, and what their motivations are, their intentions are, and so on. When the records get stolen, they're put out on the dark net. The average number of views of your records when they're stolen is 43 times inside the dark net. And your information is parsed out and sold about 7 different times. So birth date, social security number, birth date, address, social security number, address, name, those kind of things are all sold and parsed out. So those records, so if you lost 80 million records, multiply that 5, multiply that by 7, that's really what the total damage is of that information being sold on the dark net. So it's a whole new world out there that's much more mature. And as directors, the first thing I'll tell you guys that I would recommend you do is get a great cyber law attorney. And that's not your GC. Get a cyber law attorney, because what you want to do is limit the discoverability when there's a breach, and protect yourselves from a legal standpoint. So what a cyber law attorney will be able to write the terminology around making attorney-client privilege and the work product before, during, and after a breach. It limits the discovery. So what happened at Target was the discovery was about this deep. They just kept discovering, and those poor board of directors will be in and out of federal court for the rest of their golden years. So what you want to do with a cyber law attorney is, somebody who's familiar with cyber law, is to limit that discoverability so it's a short conversation. And that's the best thing I can tell you right now to do. Second thing is be change agents in the company. Don't be satisfied with your CIO. I will tell you, your CIO is probably he or she is predominantly part of the problem, because they're working out of a 1990s duct-taped playbook when your adversaries had been working out of a 2050 playbook for over 3 decades. So your CIO wants that shiny new software product or that shiny new hardware product, and this is going to be the thing that's going to help us. The average number of software and hardware products in an enterprise organization is about 85. I think, Jason, you'll subscribe to that. So it's one of those complex things, but the point is you can spend all these millions of dollars on technology, and you have to, but it all can be rendered absolutely useless by one insider. 94% of all data breaches are caused by some type of human intervention, and that's either a careless employee that's valet parking their car, somebody dropping USB drives in your parking lot, and people picking them up and using them and throwing them in their computer, and they have this is what's happening. That's just one of thousands of things that are being done today. But these are all types of things that people need to be aware of and moving forward. So we're actually, the three of us talked last night. We're excited to get questions from you guys today. We want to make this absolutely valuable to you and answer all your questions that you've got.
Excellent. So we've got a couple that came in. So Gary, when you look at the different market segments that are out there between enterprise, mid-market and small business, which ones do you see the most at risk and why?
Well, this is a question it's a great question, and it's a national level type of question because I think our government tries to solve the problems of cybersecurity, well-meaning, but misdirected in some cases. Regulation, a lot more regulation is seen as a solution. One-size-fits-all approach, a compliance-oriented mindset. And big companies, right, can handle that, right, and they invest a lot in it and they try to keep up with it. What I worry about, I think in our country, the greatest risk is in the small companies. And when you look at the way our economy works, right, the interdependency of the supply chain, right, no company is a standalone entity, right? They depend on subcontractors, many external relationships. And the further you go down into that supply chain, the more risk is because a lot of times these small companies, they outsource their IT. Somebody else is managing their server. They're just using the application. They're not thinking about security every day, right? So who is? And probably not somebody is thinking about it to the level it needs to be. So the interdependency and the smaller companies, I think, is where the greatest risk is, just from a corporate perspective.
Excellent. Yeah, so this one somewhat hits home because I happen to be based in Hong Kong at the time this went down. But Casey, two-parter. Can you explain exactly what the darknet is and why it can't be shut down? And part and parcel to that, what happened with the Bank of Bangladesh? Cheers.
Wow.
It's a big two-parter, so pull up a chair, buckle up. We're gonna be here a while.
Okay. Does that mean my seat back and tray table needs to be up?
Exactly.
The dark net is 96% of the internet. Think of it as an iceberg, okay? The internet is an iceberg. Only 4% is the surface net above the water level. That's what we use every day in our websites and our emails, and it's searchable by Google and Bing and Safari and all that kind of stuff. That's 4% of the internet that we're aware of. 96% of the internet is the dark net. It's not searchable by Google and so on. It's only searchable by a tool called Tor, which was developed by the US Navy. So what they have is, basically that's where all the bad stuff happens in the dark net, okay? I mean, if you want it, it's there. If you want to buy and sell human beings, body parts, arms, stolen PII, personally identifiable information, your insurance records, your personal records, your OPM records, all other kind of stuff, anything that's there, even though OPM was done by someone else, a nation state. But the point is, everything's in the dark net, and so people are in there looking for opportunity. And so when your records are stolen, that's in the dark net, and they're trying to get payment for it, and so on. So the answer back on the Bank of Bangladesh, a nation state actually, we have operatives in the dark net. I'll just put it that way. And so what came across the dark net was we found a nation state that actually found a vulnerability in the banking system. So there's this whole ecosystem when you're looking at what's going on with cyber, and you say, when is our hack going to happen, or is there going to be a hack, and that kind of stuff. You have to really understand who your adversaries are, how they're motivated, how they're coming at you, and when you understand that, then you can have a proper cybersecurity strategy and a cybersecurity action plan, if you will, and risk profile and so on and so forth. Otherwise, you're kind of like looking in the trying to fight a ghost in the dark.
Excellent. So, now that we've got a lot of the scary bits and the baseline established there, as we look forward, what we're really talking about here is risk mitigation. So, Gary, how do you look at cyber insurance, the pros and the cons, and what should the perspective of the board be on cyber insurance?
It's a great question to ask your company, right, or your CIO, do we have cyber insurance? Cyber insurance, in our case, we use it. We've used it for years. It's a rider on top of our corporate policy. We have underwriters that come in every year and they look at us from our cybersecurity. They spend time with me. They spend time with my team. And, at least fortunately, they've renewed it every couple of years. I like cyber insurance because not that it allows us to transfer some of the risk, right, from a loss perspective. I like it because, they're looking at us. It helps us continue to raise our game. But I like it better for our suppliers, right? We want to be able to make our suppliers meet a standard, right, that may not be, rock solid or bulletproof, but it may be better than what they're having today. So I do think that increasingly cyber insurance is a very valid part of an overall risk mitigation program. The challenge is, the actuarial data behind cyber insurance is still new, right? So, there's a lot more breaches out there, but understanding the real impact of data breaches and being able to put that in the actuarial tables and then come up with the right premiums and so forth, I think they're still evolving. But what I have noticed in the last 5 years since we've been using it, 5 years ago when the underwriters came, it was one or two people asking some very basic questions. Today, when they come every year, they bring a group of people with a bunch of letters behind their name, and they ask really good questions. So I do believe that part of the insurance industry is really evolving, I think, quickly. And I think in the long run, it will help companies raise their game.
Okay. Actually, you brought up a point. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Go for it.
I'd like to add one thing on cyber insurance. Be careful, because what's happening with the cyber insurers, they're excluding, every year they're excluding more and more and more and more. So keep an eye on that.
Yeah. So Gary, you brought up an interesting point here that I think we should go a little bit deeper on. So, as firms look to basically mitigate their own internal risk, third-party risk seems to keep popping back up. Is either one that folks want to ignore a bit, or is the biggest glaring hole of the lack of accountability and control? How do you guys address third-party risk?
That is the one area when I think about cyber risk, the way I talk to our board about it, there's three areas of risk, and we can talk about it individually. Enterprise risk, right, is what I call homeland security. That's protecting our enterprise, our data centers, our servers, our mainframes, our 30,000 employees, and that's a big job. All those endpoint devices, all of that. Second thing I worry about is our members, our consumers, our member-facing retail side of the house, if you will. How we interact with the members, whether they're calling up through a call center or they're logging on with our mobile app or logging into USA.com. We've got to secure that channel. But the third area of risk that I talk to the board about is what we call our cyber supply chain. So all of our relationships with outside vendors, and in the financial services business, we have hundreds of relationships. What we have to be able to do on the security side is we have to look at all of our relationships, and we have to be able to risk rank those from a cyber perspective, right? So out of our 450 relationships that we have with my company, there's about 100 of those that we consider high-risk relationships due to either the type of access they have to our network or the type of information that we provide them for a legitimate purpose. And so we spend a lot more time on the high-risk vendors than we would the lower-risk vendors. They're all part of the risk equation, but you only have so much resources to focus on this. So we're going to focus on our high risk first. But I'm able to talk to my board about supply chain risk and help them understand what are we doing for those 110 high-risk vendors, right? It starts with contract language. But there's other things you have to be able to do, and you could do a site visit and understand that. That's good for a point in time. But then there's the next level of continuous monitoring of those high-risk relationships. And the marketplace has helped us because there are some services and vendors out there that help us monitor third parties that kind of understand their state of cybersecurity at a basic high level, not a detailed level. So all of those things help us explain the cyber supply chain problem. But for me, that's the area of greatest risk for our company.
Okay, excellent. So, Casey, this one's coming your way. So it kind of feels like the Wild West, right? I mean, there's all kinds of bad things happening. We've heard various government officials, the SEC, former director of the CIA, kind of publicly state that really until human life is impacted in the U.S., the U.S. government itself is not necessarily going to institute the cyber police to protect all of us. Can you maybe expand a little bit on what's Homeland Security doing? How does that fit into the different government agencies? And what should a board expect from a support standpoint from the government, and what should they not expect?
Don't expect anything from the government. Seriously, they will tell you you're on your own. And, I mean, look at Obamacare. And no, it's not a political discussion. My point is, don't expect the government to do anything. If the FBI or when the FBI knocks on your door, that's a bad day. That means your secrets are already in the wind. Okay? FBI, I on FBI stands for investigation. That means they can only get involved after a crime has been committed. So they're not a proactive organization. I respect them. We work very tightly with those guys. They're awesome, but they're great at what they do. But they have a little piece of the pie. Don't expect the government to help you. You are on your own. Congressional policy and so on and so forth. They're talking about raising the requirements and just making more regulation and that kind of thing, and pointing the fingers on directors and executives inside of companies. I don't know if that's really the answer. It really comes down to protecting your own house. is what it is. And understanding what to do and what do you do Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning in this entire thing.
Got it. So Gary, when we start to look forward to mitigate this risk, how are you quantifying that for the board? And how often do you meet with the board? Is there a standing committee? Do you do it ad hoc? What's the flow for
At
you?
least at my company, so I meet with the board every quarter. I've got a meeting coming up in 3 weeks. I live from board to board meeting. Those are my big episodic events. Twice a year, I meet with the board risk committee, and then twice a year I meet with the full board. And it gives you a little sense of the level of interest that the board has on this topic. And so we have a set approach to how we talk to the board. It's been an evolution over the years. I really spent the first couple of years really educating the board. And one of the best practices that, in fact, the NACD Cyber Risk Handbook that I think you all have seen, we just updated that to version 2.0. It'll be coming out through NACD here in the next, I'm going to guess, a couple of months. One of the recommendations that I put in there is, you should spend time with your security team, right? Go spend half a day, spend a couple hours with them, and really get to know who's doing this and what they're seeing. It's very educational, helps you bring that perspective back. We've done that with several of our board members over the years, and so they have a much better sense of what's going on. But when it comes to quantifying risk, that's a really, really hard problem, right? We can model this out. My best friend at work is the chief risk officer on that team. We could model out what does a breach of 1 million records look like, right? We could tell you what the cost is based on industry averages, what the recovery costs are, what it takes to bring forensics in. We could come up with a number. As we modeled it out with our chief risk officer, again, we did this a couple of years ago, what we found really difficult to quantify, but it was the biggest concern, was the loss of trust and confidence of our brand, right? The recovery of that, that's the great unknown, right? But we know in our business it's really bad because trust and confidence is at the central crux of what we do for our members. So we could show and we could come up with numbers, right? This is what it costs, to figure out what the $20 horse, really takes to protect. But for us, it's much, much bigger than that, right? Just from the type of business that we're in.
Got it. So for this next question, I'm contractually obligated to say the word Watson at least once a day in meetings since I work for IBM, so I got that plug in. So, Casey, technology is definitely a double-edged sword here, right? What technology, Watson, is on the evolution here to help mitigate that risk? I had to get it in.
Repeat that, please.
Exactly. So what technology is on the horizon to help mitigate some of the risk we're seeing right now that boards should be mindful of to get their head around in a forward-looking standpoint?
I mean, there's all kinds of new technologies on the horizon, and CIOs and some CEOs are saying that's the thing that's going to be the killer app or the killer thing that's going to save us. We put false hope and false sense of security around technology, and I'm a technology guy and a management consulting guy. So there's artificial intelligence. There's, the buzzword the last couple of years is cyber intelligence. That's, in other words, what's coming through the network and so on and so forth. Like I said before, if I can impress one thing upon everybody here today is that it's the human factor, okay? Software is created by humans, it's configured by humans, and it's managed by humans. Hardware is the same thing. And that makes up networks, and that's where your data is stored. The U.S. economy is built on innovation. As we continue to rocket up this curve on technology, more and more of our innovation is stored in technology. So you're going to see things like artificial intelligence, the next big wave, and you got to understand most of this is predicated and pushed by the venture capital community and so on and so forth. The venture capital community grinds out one new cybersecurity product company every day for the past 7 years. You guys know that the market is absolutely confusing and noisy and so on. So my answer to your question, Watson, is don't. Your technology guys and your IT guys and gals are going to be, I want this flashy new product and so on and so forth. Let me tell you, one employee, one turned employee in your enterprises, one out of every 50 employees on average is a turned employee, blackmailed, honeypotted, or something like that. You've got that going on in your organizations. That one or the point is, or the rogue employee, the disgruntled employee, the ex-employee, or just the careless employee, and we got a lot of those too. One of those can render all of your IT completely useless. And so that's what I want to leave you with today. Back to you.
Gotcha. So, we used to kind of 5 years past use the moniker that, a firm has either been breached, they're being breached and don't know it, or they're about to be breached. We've effectively lopped off that last one because no longer about to be breached, something's happened. So Gary, for you, what should a board need to think about when it comes to reporting a breach or an incident? And then how do you run a tabletop exercise to ensure you've got the right mechanics in place? And how often do you do that?
Yep, great questions. In fact, we just had an exercise last week at USAA. When you plan a cyber breach exercise for a large company like ours, it's a little bit like planning your own funeral, right? You create this really bad scenario, and then you execute it. And in the cyber breach world, it's not just about the security team, right? They're one small piece of this, but it really requires an enterprise response, right? This is going to be general counsel involved, corporate communications. There's going to be lines of business leaders involved. You're going to bring in outside agencies like forensics firms, maybe media relations. So in our exercise last week, so I'm answering it backwards, we actually brought in our third parties. The previous year, we had ran an exercise like, how do we pull this together if we have a really bad day? We brought all internal partners in. Then this time, we brought internal partners and our external partners in. People don't do that. That's a lot of work, and it's priceless, though, from an experience perspective. I hope we never have to break glass and use that particular scenario, right, bringing all those people together, but it's considered prudent planning. We do it, right? Now, going back to your question about breaches and reporting to the board, there's one thing there's a phrase that's used, right? We kind of used it here today. Companies either have been breached or they will be breached, right? And I think the implication there is everybody will have a really bad day or they've already had the bad day, right? In my world, we deal with stuff every single day. We haven't had a major breach, and we're working hard to prevent one, but we deal with stuff every day because the type of things that come in the network, it's a multi-layered defense approach. We catch stuff that makes it through all those technology layers. We catch stuff that maybe happens in our supply chain. We are responding to cyber stuff every single day. And most of the time, they don't reach the threshold of somebody calling me in the middle of the night, although that occasionally happens, right? But most of that stuff is what I call, it's the cost of doing business, right, in the interconnected digital age, right? So the team that's doing that, we think we're pretty good at it, right? But we never take it for granted because the adversaries are very skilled, they're very agile, the environment changes, they have the luxury of timing, they have the luxury of great intelligence, and they have the luxury of being anonymous and probably not getting caught. So all of those things make the job really hard. Our job is not to prevent something bad from happening. That's nice. Our job is to be able to respond quickly if something does happen. So while we do spend money on the prevent part of the equation, right, we're going to buy firewalls. You have to do that. We're going to buy intrusion detection systems. We're going to put data loss prevention in there, all those type of technologies. I value our analysts that have to respond to these alerts that come up every day because what we don't want is a bad problem to get really bad or worse. So the response part of it's really, really important. What I brief the board is I brief on trends. I'm not going to brief them on, well, we had 7 phishing emails come into the CEO's office last week. That's irrelevant. What I care about is from a strategic systemic risk perspective, right? What are we seeing? How are we dealing with it? Are we postured to be able to deal with the threat as it continues to evolve? So I give them big picture trends, right, when I talk to them. And I put context around it because what I don't want to do is create the, oh my gosh, it's really bad because we've had 200,000 attacks on average every single day that are blocking. That's interesting. It may be 100,000 tomorrow, maybe 400,000 tomorrow. It doesn't necessarily change the risk equation. I got to put, what does this mean to us? And is there more risk today than there was yesterday? And do we have more risk expected tomorrow? And why? Because of what the lines of business are doing. So that's the conversation that I have when I go to the board.
Okay. So this is for both of you. We'll start with KC. So what should a board member do to protect themselves going forward, both from a technical standpoint and a process legality standpoint, and to kind of frame it out a little bit? So we've got iPads, iPhones, all kinds of computers, preloaded, cameras, right? We hear all these things. What should the board member do, either at the office or at home, to be mindful of that technically, and then also from the information that they have in their own disposal from a legality standpoint?
It's early in the morning, so I'm just going to come out and say it. You are being stalked, and your families are being stalked only because you're board members. And just assume that your computers at home are compromised. Assume that your iPhone or your new Galaxy 7 is compromised. So if you're in a board meeting, put all the phones outside. Assume that camera's working. Assume that you're being recorded. It's that bad. It's really that bad. So assume on your laptops at home or your grandkids' laptops and so on and so forth, those cameras are always on and active, even though the green light's not on and that kind of thing. So there's a cyber hygiene type of thing that we've got to get everybody up to on a curve, and it's not a 1 hour conversation. It's taking somebody through a process. Wow, I didn't know that. Like going into a hotel. If you're going to use Wi-Fi, use a VPN. If you're using a computer or an iPhone, make sure that you've got, or a phone, make sure you've got a VPN on that before you ever access free Wi-Fi. I don't use free Wi-Fi. I use the network. I use AT&T's network. Okay, it's much more secure than going through Wi-Fi. You don't know who's on. The point is, your company's being stalked. If you've got IP, you're being stalked. There's just no question about it. Our adversaries have shopping lists, and they have people's names associated, your names and your employees' names associated with shopping lists of information that they're trying to get to fill the equation so they can power their economy, power their military, and so on and so forth. So assume that you're compromised. Know that we all, every human in the West has to raise their cyber hygiene. And it's something that we all have to be aware of. And when you look at the intelligence that comes in, you realize there's this tremendous gap. We still think, a lot of us, I'm speaking as a country, we still think we're in Mayberry, and we're not. Andy's long gone. So those are the kind of things, just really kind of setting expectations and so on. The other thing you said, the legal piece of it, I already mentioned that, is the cyber law piece is the best thing I can give you. That's the biggest nugget today. Get a good cyber law attorney for your board of directors and make sure that discoverability goes from this to this, and it's built into any type of a breach. One last thing, Gary's response plan, that's excellent. To do a data breach response plan, they also call those tabletop exercises. Bringing in a third party is awesome. By the way, your weakest link is your law firm. They're cavemen when it comes to IT, and they've got, I've spoken to conferences of 1,500 attorneys, and they're all in the audience going, and they've got all your IP, they've got all your pricing, they've got all your negotiations, they've got all of your contact information at the lake house and wherever else, the ski chalet where you're at and that kind of stuff. They've got everything. And so our adversaries are targeting law firms. Jesse Jones, somebody asked Jesse James, why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. And so you got to realize that's still the case today. So that's the best thing I can tell you right now as far as protection.
So Gary, how do you treat that for your board members, and how do you guys kind of walk them through that step?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about a risk management context, right? It could be so bad where I'm just not going to do anything, right? That's not the real world that we operate in. For our board members, there's things like Board Vantage, right? If you're going to do corporate communications regarding your duties, in our particular case, we use the existing processes and the tools that we give them. Are they bulletproof? No, nothing's bulletproof. It's much better than just sending things in generic email from Hotmail and putting sensitive information. So we train our board members not to avoid putting sensitive corporate information in personal emails, right? That's basic security 101. On a personal level, what I tell people is it starts with email. You don't put things in an email, right, that you don't think somebody else will see. Protecting access to those home accounts. If you can use something like two-factor or multi-factor authentication, whether it's your Facebook account or your email account, I recommend that you use stronger authentication, right? That's the future. If not, change your passwords occasionally and use different passwords for different accounts. It's a really bad model today because people have so many accounts, right? What do? They use the same password, right? User ID, because it's just easier to remember. The problem is, if any of those accounts get compromised, they do sometimes, fraudsters and criminals are pretty good. They know, let's go try this on Facebook. Let's go try this on Amazon.com. Oh, let's try this on USAA.com, right? So that is a continuous cycle. There's basic things that I wish you didn't have to worry about. My daughter just bought a computer for college. I bought it, actually. As I was helping her set it up, she's turning it on. The first thing she wants to do is start going on to Facebook and Twitter with her friends. I said, let me see the computer. I have to make sure it's got antivirus software on it. The security configurations are set up. Some of that was defaulted on, some of it wasn't. I had to add some additional things to it. As a consumer, that's a terrible model, right? It's a no-win model. When you buy a car, you don't have to establish the anti-brake system or set up blind spot monitoring, all the technology. It's already there. So our country and the vendor side of the house has to do a better job making it easy. But things like just basic security software, settings on there, not using public Wi-Fi, and using strong passwords or stronger authentication on your home accounts, are the basics that you should do, because other people don't do that, and they're easy targets.
So to build on that one a little bit further, Gary.
Jason, we got a question from the audience right
sorry.
here. Just one sec, Alfred.
I'm on the board of a New York Stock Exchange company, trade on the New York Stock Exchange, and we have one of the major accounting firms come in. Their IT consulting group comes in every 6 months and does a complete audit on what our IT issues are. Is that enough, number one? And number two, I probably get every 2 months a 400-page board book for our board meeting on my PC, sent to me on my PC through email.
So,
Is the normal kind of PC antivirus stuff enough? And if not, what do I do?
So question number one, is your annual audit or biannual audit or whatever periodic audit enough? That is not enough. That's a compliance. They're going to look at basic things, and it's a checkbox type of mentality. They're going to look at things. Do they do vulnerability management? Yes, they do it. Do they have antivirus? Yes, they do it. They're not looking for how well they do it, right? It's a harder problem to answer. So they're just looking for the basics, right? So I would tell you, in the security business, there's a saying, compliance does not equal strong cybersecurity. You got to do compliance. You don't have a choice, but a lot of companies will stop there because it's expensive, and investing in the next level to get more operationally effective is usually more dollars and more money. So the answer is no, it's not enough. It's an interesting data point, but it's not going to give you a real sense of maturity of an overall program and how operationally effective it is. In terms of the board book being sent to you on a PC, right? That's kind of interesting, right? I'm assuming there's sensitive information in that, and if it was just sent as an attachment in an email to Gmail or AOL.com, I'm a little surprised by that, because there's even basic encryption that they could put on that to allow you to receive it in a personal email account. A little surprised that they would do that, but again, I don't know exactly. Maybe there is something there, but just from what you've told me, seems like a bad practice and an easy one to fix.
I'd like to add something else to that. From a heart, you're talking about PCs and so on and so forth. Real quick story. A company in Canada called Nortel was the largest company in Canada. It was the AT&T of Canada. Largest company in Canada, started in 1895, largest employer, and so on and so forth. Chinese got in their network in 2000 and started stealing secrets. And they got in through the CEO's password. And through the CEO's password, they got other executives' passwords and so on and so forth. The IT guy came in running up, and basically 2 years later, 2002, said, hey, this is what's going on. They pretty much said they turned a blind eye. Let's just fast forward. So you had a company in China, and you had this company in Canada, $30 billion company in Canada. Over the next 8 years, the company in China called Huawei went up to $30 billion, and this company in Canada is now bankrupt. So you've got this company, Huawei. Short story, you're all mostly Houstonians. So I got a call from my network and said, did you know that the city of Houston is getting ready to install a bunch of Huawei routers? I said, really? The federal government figured this out, and so the federal government banned Huawei and ZTE equipment. And so I called the mayor directly. This was before Turner. And I called him, I said, do you realize this is what's going on? And I said, you need to stop this right away because all of your data is being compromised. The federal government won't install Huawei routers and servers and so on and so forth. So and the IT group was just ready to install because Huawei was making it extremely attractive to them to come in. And basically Huawei is a bunch of spy gear based on Nortel technology. There's another company called ZTE, another company called Lenovo. If you all have Lenovo laptops, I'd dump them. I would get Apple products, And then the last one is Buy-Sells, which is a cloud company. All those are compromised spyware type of companies. I would make sure your organizations are not part of it, because your IT guys are saying, wow, we can save all this money. We can save all this money and we can spend that savings over here. I'm going to put Huawei in, ZTE or Lenovo or whatever. So back to you.
So Gary, lots been said about crown jewels. What exactly are they, and how do you go about protecting them?
Well, crown jewels, it's that company information that is, unique to your company. It could be private information, corporate information, customer information, intellectual property, all those type of things. There's a saying that's often used, right, in a very generic way, right? Well, companies should know what their crown jewels are, and they should protect them at the expense of everything else. People that work in security will sit there and scratch their heads and say, that's interesting. We philosophically agree with you. I would tell you that having a place in your network where you know exactly where your crown jewels are, is kind of interesting, right, in a large company, because in most networks, right, the technology that's out there, some of it's cloud-based, some of it's virtual-based, some of it's client-server-based. Information is everywhere inside a network, right, and it's accessed by third parties all over the place. So saying, focus on securing or encrypting that information that's your crown jewel is a little bit of a red herring problem, right, because it's not that simple in the real world, right, of corporate networks. I do think that CIOs, CSOs, the people that are accountable for this should be able to talk to a board and say, this is how we view this problem, right? This is how we view our corporate networks, the information that's in the networks, the most sensitive information, and this is how we mitigate that, and this is what our residual risk is, right? And if they give you a really comfortable answer that makes everybody smile, it's a terrible answer, right? Because this is a really hard problem. This is all about residual risk, right? You're not going to eliminate this risk. It's all about talking intelligently and providing context about how much residual risk do we have today, and what would it take to drive it down to a different level. And that's a very different conversation than just say, what are our crown jewels and are they protected?
Excellent. So, Casey, there's a lot of I call it fancy terms, exfiltrate, encryption, right, that the cyber group seems to use again and again. From a risk mitigation standpoint, in and around what folks can do at a personal level for their company, what are the one or two things, be it encryption or more secure passwords, what can a firm and a person do individually to try to mitigate that risk as best they can?
Number one, realize that your target, we're all targets, by the way. Gary had a great idea. It's one of the things is change your passwords frequently. Don't use the same password on all your on each account. Use a different variation of passwords. 2 layers of identification. So when somebody calls AT&T, the director of the CIA was compromised through his Verizon phone, and they got to his Verizon email account and personal account because somebody just called up and said, hey, I need to reset my password. He didn't have 2-layer or second-layer authentication on his account. If he would have had that, it probably would have stopped that. So two-layer authentication, just be wary of technology. Technology, as Jason said, is a two-edged sword. It's wonderful, but it's rocketing. We're going now into this Internet of Things. That means your refrigerator, your coffee pot, anything. I wouldn't buy anything made in China that you plug into the wall. That's just me. Because seriously, I'm not kidding. You need to understand, when you see the intelligence that comes across my desk, you need to understand that, okay? So they put a 57-cent chip in a coffee maker because it's plugged in 24/7, or your washer, your dryer, your clock radio, those type of things. And it takes all the Wi-Fi traffic in your house. If you don't have a password, a strong password on your router, it'll route all of your emails that are flying around in your house, all of your sensitive emails, your pictures on your iPhone, all that stuff on your Wi-Fi is being sent back to China. Or Russia, or whoever the attacker is, and so on. So those basic things, on your major accounts, change your password frequently, at least once a month. Somebody said, what about Podesta? They got that guy. Well, first of all, number one, I wouldn't be putting that stuff on email, period. Second of all, if I did, it would be encrypted. And then I'd be deleting my emails as soon as I sent them, and I'd tell everybody else, as soon as you send them, delete your emails. And one of the things is they go into your history, and that's a treasure trove. And most of us are not clean that way. We keep everything in the sent file. We don't empty our trash, and so it's a treasure trove of information. So it's the hygiene thing that we're talking about. So back to you.
So Gary, this is coming your way. As boards look at succession planning, what is the ideal board member's cyber background, or should they look for someone who has specific cyber experience? What would that profile look like? Where would they go?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know that more boards are starting to add people with a technology risk type of background in there. I know of a couple of folks that have gotten out of the military at senior levels and now are on boards, and they're asked to bring that cyber risk perspective to the game. I think you're going to see more of that, right? But I think regardless of the composition of the board, the type of questions that you can ask, you don't need to be a CISO expert or have that background. It helps to have people, especially the more complex the company is, the larger it is. All of those things are going to factor into how you compose the board.
What's your take on that, Casey?
Don't put a CIO on the board. If CIO, if he or she's got a background that's a chief information officer, that's not who you want. You want a risk person that understands cyber, and if they've got some type of an affiliation or credential with intelligence, you want that as well, because otherwise, cyber, you're just operating in a bubble. This thing is moving so quickly that you really need an intelligence feed to make sure that you're as cutting edge as you possibly can be. That's my take on it.
Excellent. So, as we start to kind of wind down here, any final thoughts, comments, questions?
I mentioned earlier that it's going to get worse. The average time that the bad guys are in your network it was 22 months. Now it's down to about 18 months. OPM, the nation state that was in the OPM network was in the network for 14 months. So as Gary was saying, you want to let's find out as soon as somebody gets in the network and get them the heck out and do this damage control and so on. But realize it's a new world that we're living in, and we all have to, our adversaries are making us bring our game up. And the worst thing that we possibly can have is complacency. And that's what we have across the board through the United States is complacency. I will say that people are really, really busy in the industry working out of a patched up, duct-taped 1990s playbook. Adversaries have been working on a 2050 playbook for over 3 decades. Actually, 1986, month number 3. If you want to Google it, it's called Program 863. So that's it's not to be too scary. I'm not trying to make a down day for you and that kind of stuff. It's all manageable. But my point is, just be the change agent. Just be the change agent. Don't always needle your people. Don't be the board member that's the nice person. Oh, I love this board member and that kind of stuff. Needle these people, make them better. I remember when I was going through school. I don't remember the coaches that were real nice. I don't remember the teachers that were real nice. I remember the ones that were hard on me. Okay, and I remember their middle names. So the same thing. My challenge is all you guys be that coach, so people will remember your middle name and fight for our country, because every time one of these cuts happen, part of America goes with it.
Gary, same thing.
I want to thank you for being here today. I think part of your job is to get smarter, right, on the type of issues that we're dealing with, and so you're here today as a way of getting smarter. I would refer you to the NACD Cyber Risk Handbook. If you haven't seen that, it's out there. There are questions in there. We're going to release version 2.0 here soon. That'll provide you some more questions. And I would say you could start off, if your board doesn't get a briefing on cybersecurity or even anything around security, just getting that on the agenda would be a good first step, right? And then listening to what they're briefing you. Most CISOs, CSOs, CIOs that go before a board, it's going to be a very controlled, orchestrated delivery of information, right? And it's going to be low on bad news and high on good news, right? That's just what we do, right? And so your challenge is to ask really good questions that get outside what they want to tell you. And I'm not trying to call an airstrike on my own position, because I've been there, but I do feel like there's that natural tension between the operating there's that natural tension that's always there, and your job is to ask questions that draw beyond what's on the PowerPoint chart.
Excellent, yeah. And thank you for the time and the focus. We appreciate everyone, being mindful of this topic, and it's one that's going to continue for a while. So thank you again. Appreciate it. For the opportunity. Thank you, guys.